Alright, so greetings pilgrims once again. Today we're going to go over just a little bit of the information I want to give you guys is my standard settings and plugins and the way that I have Max specifically configured in order to do 3D modeling. Just some of the common things I use. I want to let you guys know about that so that if you're interested in following suit, you can, or just letting you know what the options are and kind of my feelings on them. So let's go ahead and bump the mic and let's go ahead and get started, okay? Alright, so here we are inside of Max, and some of my standard settings I wanted to go over with you are, I don't really change much in the way of the layout of Max to begin with. I'm very comfortable and happy with this 4-grid layout. My perspective view down here, which I use to look at all the objects, and then I consistently have my front, top, and left. And I use left instead of right for various reasons, just kind of what I got started with, so I just stick with that. So as I have objects in the scenes, let's create an object really quick, just to kind of show you. So now I know that when I move this, I know that I'm moving on the x-axis in the positive direction, so it should be moving to the right in my front window, but it will not be moving in my left window. So those are just kind of things that I like to keep them in check. So as I work with the different windows, I find that it's very easy just to Alt-W makes that window full screen. So I can bounce back and forth here just by pointing and clicking in each one. So that's really easy, and that's how I like to work with that. Now let's get into some of the actual options and settings up here, because this is a completely standard setup. So I'm going to go through and show you some of the things that I change. Starting with the rendering options here, we go into rendering. Let's go into render setup. So render setup is all of our options for both the size of the image that we're going to render out and how it's going to treat the rendering process, how it's going to treat light, how it's going to handle shadows and that sort of thing. So I don't really change much. I'm pretty happy with the way it works thus far. And again, I'm learning just like you guys are every day. So let's go ahead and put in here 1920 by 1080. If I can, there we go. Alright, so let me kind of kill that, get out of my face. So 1920 by 1080, and you can lock the resolution there using this button here, and that will lock it to that aspect ratio. So this is a 16 by 9 full 1080p, setup. So that means if I change this number to anything, even just a number that I'm just kind of making up, 500, it'll show you what the equivalent is, which is awesome. I keep wanting to look up here, but you guys are right here now. So let's do 1920 there, bam, right back to 1080. That's perfect. So there's nothing else here that I really want to change necessarily. The assign renderer is what rendering engine is it using? So right now I'm using the default scanline renderer, and there are times that you'll click this button and say, I want to use mental ray. I don't really get into a whole lot of architectural and visualization where you would need mental ray, but I do use it occasionally. Alright, so this tab is looking good. Let's go over to the renderer tab, and this is a little bit more about the back end of how some of this stuff works. And so under anti-aliasing, I like to change this to Mitchell Netravali. I have a really hard time saying that. Mitchell, I change it to that. And then global super sampling, I usually enable that, and Hammersley I really like. So there's been a lot of debate over which setup between these two works. These are the ones that worked for me, personal preference, and that's usually when I'm doing a nice soft lighting using the ambient occlusion. When I'm doing that, I use these two settings. Other than that, it doesn't. If you're just doing, you just turn these off, put it back to area, and leave that. If you're just working with a prototype of a shape, or sometimes when I'm making an example to show somebody, I just use that, and it doesn't really matter, So that's that. We don't really need anything under advanced lighting yet. Render elements, here's where you could add, if you wanted an alpha map to be rendered out as well. That's pretty handy for doing logos. I do a lot of my work for Photoshop elements inside of 3ds Max. I can create something and then render it out and composite it. So that's how we can do there. All right, the other thing, pardon me, that I like to customize is you'll notice when I render, come on, when I render, there we go. I don't know why it wasn't working. The background color is a personal preference as well. So we go back to our rendering. It's not under there, it's actually under environment. There we go, so we bring that up. My personal preference for the background color is this 55, 55, 55. I like it. I think it's a nice balance based upon the things that I typically make. Now this would change, of course, if you're working on something that it makes sense to. I don't really see a need for it to be black, which is the standard. So I leave it there. And if the higher up you go, you could go mid-tone gray, 128, but it just seems to be too bright. So I like a nice soft 55 as my standard. And that's what you'll see behind this here. So it looks a little bright for this because this is just a random color thrown on here based upon the algorithm that Max uses. But when I generally have things and I can lay them out and do soft lighting with the matte shadow background, I think this color tends to work the best. All right, so next on my list here is let's go ahead and look at our preferences for the viewports, okay? So we go up to customize preferences. We have a whole lot of options in here. And one of the things that I wanted to make sure you were aware of is under the viewports tab, down here your display drivers. You gotta make sure these are set properly based upon your graphics card. This is what I have currently installed based upon my graphics card. And what that allows me to do is when I have my materials that have normal maps and all kinds of things applied to them, I can view them in the viewport, which saves a lot of time going back and forth doing other things. You know, I still use things like Marmoset, things like 3Do to absolutely get some of the more specifics, but to see how my normal map is looking without having to leave the application is very handy. So that's what we got here. And there's all kinds of settings all throughout here, guys. Make sure you just take a look around, and even if you don't understand what it means, don't necessarily make any changes, but look at it so you know where it's at, because I had an issue the other day and somebody told me about the gamma. I had never touched the gamma before. And I looked, and sure enough, something I had installed reset the gamma. So they told me where to go and look for it. So you learn all kinds of things. One other thing here under general is your scene undo. I wouldn't recommend putting this too crazy high, but I have mine set at 20, which is pretty good. I think at one point I had it set to 50, but that's only for if you're being a little sloppy with your workflow and you're just making a bunch of changes and you go, oh, that's terrible, let me undo it. You just undo it, hoping it'll go past that point that you really want it to. So putting that a little higher might help sometimes. All right, so that's it for that. Now let's talk about specifically with the viewports. You can do things like the shaded edges. So right now this is set to realistic plus edged faces, and I don't really like that. I like shaded plus edged faces. So let's change the, well, we'll do that in a second. Let me do one. So shaded plus edged faces means that I'm getting some basic shading, and the realistic I think is a little too far sometimes. I don't necessarily need that. So I just go with shaded. Constant colors is too far on the other side. I don't get much shading at all, or probably none at all. It looks a little bit like there on the bottom, but I think that's kind of faux. So shaded is good. Edged faces, you can actually toggle this with F4. So I'm hitting F4, you see how it goes away there, which is nice. You can't see it too well on the object right now, but we're going to get into it in just a second. So that's a really handy thing. As you're working, you want to see your points, you want to see your edges, and you can hit F4 and step back and look at it just as a whole unit. And then hit F4 and just go right back in. So that's really awesome. I like that a lot. Okay, so now let's get into my standard material setup and the wireframe color. So we hit M, we'll bring up our material browser. I started with Max 2012 or 13, I think it was. You can use the Slate material editor or the node-based. I like this mode. This is what I'm used to, so this is what I use. Even though I use Substance Designer, which is a node-based editor, for Max, I like it to be a certain way. And once I learn, that aha moment of why it's so great, then I'll probably change. So my standard material setup, if I just drag material onto here, let's go and look at what we've got for the diffuse color, is 155. That's the number that I use for my basic gray material. And then I have another one that I set up here at the 55 again, even though that's the background color, I don't use this as my final object color. I'll just use this as, say this was a compendium piece. So I bring this guy up, yep, copy, make you smaller, make you smaller. So say this was a second piece. I'll do that just to differentiate in the editor here for me to say, oh, well, this is classification A, this is classification B. And then what I typically do is this final slot here I use as a, I'll just click that for now, just to kind of demonstrate that I'll have a checker pattern or a UV set here, and that will be my UV check. So I'll drag that on, look at it, and then drag back. Are you a primary object or are you a secondary object? Okay? So that handles the materials themselves. However, we still have ugly wireframe colors. So to fix that, you can go into each one individually, or I just select them all. And right up here, right after where the name of the object would be, you click this box, and this brings up your object color. Now what this does when there's no material on the color, it makes it the whole object that color. But when you have a material now, it just makes the wireframe that color. But I like black. I choose black for all of my wireframes. Because if I hide the grid, I can see this well. You know, that's my personal preference. Some people like to choose white. They say that, oh, white is a better color. But to me, it feels like I can never unselect it. I don't know, it feels a little strange to me, and sometimes when you have a lighter material, it's harder to see the wireframe edge immediately. Whereas for me, if I click black, I can see it all the time. It's just sort of a preference, but that's how you change it. So if you want to change it, that's where you can go. Pardon me. All right, so 2 final notes I wanted to show you about my standard setup. So let's back out of this. Let's turn off the grids just so we can. If you were not familiar, by the way, if I have zoomed out and you just point at a viewport and hit the Z key, Z as in Z or zebra, it will autofill the frame with the with everything that it can see at the moment, or with just the selected object. See, so nothing selected, it does everything. Just this box selected, it does just that box. So just a little handy tip there. So once we've got all this done, I only really have 2 plugins that I use at the moment. The one is Text Tools, Textools, Text Tools. So let's launch that. That's a nice handy little vertical bar here. This is a godsend of a pack of tools here. It's amazing. There's so many things, but briefly, it allows you to launch the UV editor window. You'll see me use it frequently in the streams. There are some automatic texturing things here where you can say, all right, I've got my unwrap, now give me a solids map, now give me a, without having to go through Max's whole thing. The relax tool is better here. There's a linear tool which allows you to take something and say, I want you to make it linear. You can make something rectify, like rectangled. You can align. The aligning is amazing because you can align an entire shell based on one edge. So if you have a box that it's tilted, you can select one edge and say align based on this, and it will snap. Whichever one is closest 90, it'll snap the whole thing and make it nice and straight rows for you. And the most important things are right here. This little box area right here is your best friend. So the normalize button that I'm pointing at right now, normalize will take all the shells and it will scale them dependent upon one another. So if you have a can that is, say, 5 inches tall, and then you have a bottle that is 10 inches tall, it will scale the can to be exactly half as tall as that. So now, relevant to one another, they're the same. Now, to make them relevant to the real world, you use these other little options here. This first one says pixels, so I can say for every 512 pixels, I want it to be how far in the real world. So a project I was working on recently, it was every 500 pixels, I want it to be 72 inches, so 6 feet for a 512 texture. So that will change based upon your project, based upon what your needs are, but salt to taste there. But you set those things, and then when you have the object selected, you just right click this and it will auto set those things. Perfect. Or if you have one that this is correct and I want to make this the same, you select this and you can click the left thing and to say get. And right now there's nothing because we haven't done any unwraps, but you left click and it will get that information, and you can right click on an object and set that information. Okay? So that brings us to the final plugin, so let's go ahead and close that for now. Final plugin is an organizational tool, and you'll notice that my, I'm going to point off screen here, but it won't really make sense. Around here is my picture-in-picture webcam you guys are seeing me right now. The reason why it's right here and not over here is because of this tool that I use frequently. Now, with Macs, when you hit the H key, H as in helicopter, normally it brings up your select dialog, which shows you, here's all the objects in the scene, let me click one and select it. However, I've replaced the H key with the outliner tool. So I'm going to go ahead and hit H, and you'll see it pops out. I'm actually going to click just above these, click and drag, and drop this here. And what that does is that puts this here and puts outliner way over here. Now you'll notice that this lines up right with the webcam, because that's where I've got it set up for. Alright, so what is outliner? Well, organization is king, especially when you have large projects. You need to be organized. It's a must, so just get comfortable with it. That's all I can say. So outliner is an organizational tool which, for me, supplants the layer of ability inside of Macs. In Macs, you only have one layer. Everything's on the same layer, and you have to name everything. Outliner allows you to do multi-layers. So over here, right now, we only have 2 objects in our default layer. So I'm not sure if I can, I've never attempted, I don't think you can rename the original one. No, you cannot. But I can create new layers. So I can just right click and say create new layer, and say box 1. So this is a layer, and right now there's nothing on that layer. But I'm going to take box 1 and put it in its own layer. So now, clicking here, I can hide box 1. When the light bulb is on, think of it as like when the light touches it, it disappears. So light bulb is on, it's gone. Light bulb is off, you're okay to come out. And if you look under box 1, there's only the one object. So I can hide just that one object and not the whole layer. And in this instance, the effect is the same. I can also freeze using the little snowflake thing, which is awesome. And you notice something is frozen because the text will be italicized, okay? So now let's create a couple more layers. So go up here, right click and say, create new layer. Let's call it boxes. And what I can do is take box 1 and the layer box 1 and the object box 2 and put them one at a time under boxes. So now if we expand this, so now you see what we've got here if I unhide everything. So everything's unhidden and nothing's changed in my scene as far as the objects. They're all still exactly the same. I haven't touched them. I'm changing the organizational structure. So now I can hide all the boxes at once by clicking this button. Or I can hide just the contents of box 1 by doing that. I can hide box 2 individually. And the reason why we have this like folder for box 1 is, say box 1 we wanted to add something to it. So let's go down here and make something. Let's just do that, and I'm just going to scale. So box 1 has this little extra piece sticking off. So maybe we're making a factory here, right? And this is, you know, like a loading dock area. But I still want that to be considered, this whole area to be considered box 1, or, you know, let's go over and rename it. So you can right click, or, no, I'm sorry. It's like Photoshop where you just keep double clicking right in the spot and it brings up the rename ability. So let's call this factory building, like the actual structure of the building, okay? And then we want this object to represent like a smokestack, say, okay? So we'll go up here and let's right click and create a layer and say smokestacks. Pardon me. Then I can move back box 2 under that. Now we have a nice organizational structure where boxes, oh no, I'm sorry, yes. We move smokestacks under boxes as well. So now our boxes is everything, which we really should call this factory. So now this represents the whole factory, but this represents just the building and just the smokestacks. So now we start to see the structure really come alive, and you really start to understand how powerful this is to keep things organized, and the ability to just at any time collapse whole sections. So you're just looking at what you want to look at right now in this instance. And one important thing to note is as you're building new objects, the object is going to be added to the layer here that you have selected. And when I select the layer, I click on it, you'll notice that the icon is like 3 sheets of paper. And when the topmost piece of paper is lit up, that's the layer that the next object that is created will be added to that layer. So you cannot add an object directly to a thing. It has to be to a layer. So make sure you know which layer you're adding things to. And I think that's it as far as the greatness of that is this. But you can also change the properties and everything right from here, even the render settings on a layer. So what I frequently do is I'll have a layer that is my reference objects, and I'll set the rendering to don't render. And you can also there was a way to create a group. Maybe that's under here. Right click child nodes. No. Add selection to. There you go. So you can move entire things. Oh, it's off screen. I'm sorry. Under add selection to, off screen is giving me the list of 0 factory building, factory smokestacks. So you could select just some objects and then say, oh, I want to put these somewhere else. So there you go. So I love Outliner. I use it, with every project. That's why my camera is pretty much static in the place that it is, because it's amazing. So I just want to give you guys a quick little tour there of all of my tools as far as the way I have things set up, the way I generally work. I'm open to, of course, learning new things, as you should know. So if you have a recommendation for a tool that I don't know about, that would be extremely helpful, or a recommendation to some best practices for some of the settings that I use. I'm not professing to be any sort of an expert, so tell me and I'll be happy to make adjustments and propagate. If there's a really good tool, let me know. Let's start using it. Okay. All right. So I hope you guys have enjoyed. Let me go back to my other camera here. So I hope you guys have enjoyed, and please continue to follow, like, comment, subscribe, whatever you feel like doing. Let me know how we're doing, and if you have anything that you'd like to share, please message me, get with me, and we can do a video together or whatever. I just want to share this information with people, get it out there, and make sure everybody knows and everybody gets better. And that's what we'll continue to do. So as always, guys, thank you for watching. Please remember to follow, subscribe on YouTube. If you want to subscribe on Twitch, I appreciate that. Follow on Twitch as well. And I'll keep going. I'll keep doing live streams, and we'll take the live streams and be still putting them over to YouTube for your enjoyment there later. All right. All right. So keep practicing, get better, and I'll see you next time as the pilgrimage continues.